Hey everyone, back to our example here with our bolts. And when you tried the last example, you might run into a weird problem, this one. So when you're unlucky and you recreated this setup exactly the same way I have it here, then what can happen is that at a certain frame, the whole thing for some weird reason starts to freeze. And this is something beginners often trip over. The reason is that there is a built-in sleeping function, just like we learned in pops or grains, to make sure that if something isn't moving a lot, that it will be stopped calculating. Now the problem is the settings are pretty aggressive, and the settings you will find in the solver bullet object, and then around in the middle you have the bullet data, and there those two, the linear threshold and the angular threshold. So they're differentiating between translation and rotation, which is something we will talk about later. And if the translation or rotation drop below this number for a certain amount of time, 2 seconds, then it will start freezing. Now, first of all, where do I get the 2 seconds from? Well, the settings of how long it takes for it to freeze you will find under Advanced. It's unfortunately a bit hidden. Bullet Solver, and then here the sleeping time. So that means you have two ways of solving this. The first one is you can just lower these numbers. Maybe let's halve them and see what happens. And with the exact same simulation, you can see now it keeps running because it never falls under those numbers. Maybe at some point later, but currently it keeps running. So this is one solution of the problem. And this would be helpful if you have a big simulation, because you might want to have the case that objects will stop moving and freeze at some point to save calculation time. And maybe later we will even see it can solve some jittering problems. But for a beginner, in the most cases, and this is what I will do from now on during the course, you can just turn this function off. And the reasoning is that it's usually very fast anyway, and you will not have that many cases where things come to a complete stop. Certainly in the context of our tutorials here, it's just quicker as well to just turn it off. So to turn it off, you just go into Advanced, Bullet Solver, and then set the sleeping time to 0. And of course, if I turn this off, you can see it doesn't happen anymore. A small thing about this, by the way, you would think that the contact breaking threshold is connected to this. And I actually thought this for a long time. But when you actually read the help, you realize this here and the sleeping time don't have anything to do with each other. So remember, it's a bit confusing. You have the sleeping time, which you can set to 0, and then the whole function is turned off. Or in the solver at the beginning, you can lower the linear threshold and angular threshold to set the thresholds. So both options are there to turn this function off. Basically, I could set this both to 0, and then it will be turned off as well. And by the way, if you want to check if something goes to sleep, because maybe you want it in your simulation, like here again, we can actually activate under Visualize. We can show sleeping, and then it turns red whenever it starts to sleep. So this could be a good way of figuring out when you have this problem, because it will then simply turn red. So this is obviously then obvious when you have this case. But the problem with that is, when you have it on, you get this annoying visualization that often bothers you. So this is maybe just a quick check you could turn on from time to time if you have problems. So keep that in mind whenever parts of your RBD bullet simulation start to freeze for some reason, then you can turn it off, like I will do it most of the time under Advanced Bullet Solver and just set sleeping time to 0, or you go into the solver in the beginning and just lower the thresholds that are responsible for this. And of course there are cases where this freezing never happens, but when it happens, you should be aware. So I hope this is helpful. Thanks very much and see you later. Cheers.